Noch I leor Frankenstein ag Mary Shelley an na noch ciad diag agus a hoch diag gyn anamddish. Sgealach vránach ma yen mian clú agus science a gáil yn trí chear. Cynt is neachantach treg sin agus eunsanach agus lacshe is a chum hóisialte. Ha Eva yn dotter Frankenstein yn yw yw Eva i'ch ddeithr ych rwycha, ládjad fullisach an yn coltar a láin dŵ. Is ga filmichen, jalafint ljóð agus árein. Stochgur I Eva is buine, maar a chluch Boris Karlova, an a film an a neukia dieg sa húdja carichid. A hang deithr as iljórig Mary Shelley fatan is comasiche y smóantjin a chud an yn bdírin, fatan is imigeiltjin a nátar agus na arachgin. Hasgialach cén a dúsgig trúas is coadachgin as illévatad a cha cudumavas ik in naum.
Ha nofel tois rafig gain, mi ein de ha tachas nir ha fiach lori cws iolas, nio cws smach gain nater.
Mis mynd gyda lor han a ha togal chistjan sech a fi gamfrygart.
Charo Mary Shelley ach och blein dieg no de skrivi Frankenstein. Cha ach hútis móje skrivig de tuv Lake Geneva. A char an dúl gyda an na nalabe, fasgit dún dje a gúisk smóaint na mac manemne a hannig gubúla sa leor. Agus ban seo an na nasgu is déiche jaarn gemak hútramach gan I leoreke. Wel een program sa súl edd na tachartas an nalabe a glóis Mary Shelley gus I leor a chud an céil agus ga cnécht ar yw anfasach a chrúchig. Ha Victor Frankenstein, dyn bael cardal, y cwyd cwl de charigin an y Geneva, agus y dolgw olei Ingolstad y iaramelt, y ywsach it barach mi ein science, gyharid ffysig agus chemic. Ha sgoleddach gygremach ag gychawn.
After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter.
Díadach na bhól leis na huad amach nach chud rausachaí ha mian mór chlúg a rádachig slíchonarteach.
My imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man.
Tras yn gyfyg dieg no ddisgrif Mary Shelley I leor, fa sŵl science a giadach a galore.
What was interesting was I was reading about an experiment that was conducted by a chap called Andrew Ewer.
That was a really interesting case that happened almost, just a few months after Frankenstein was published in Glasgow, where a convicted criminal was executed and punishment of dissection was given to him. This Andrew Ewer fellow decided to use electric rods to stimulate the body in a very Frankenstein kind of way. There was a famous experiment a couple of decades before in Italy where you stimulate the frog's legs and it makes them twitch and it appears that they're jumping, bringing it back to life. And this man was very explicit in his intentions that this was an experiment to see if there was any merit in that. So this poor convicted murderer is getting electric shocks applied to him, and the audience, I guess it was a spectacle.
What would have been the medical purposes for that? Or was this again maybe in pursuit of a bit of fame?
I would say there was certainly a pursuit of making the next big discovery, but there was genuine scientific inquiry happening there. People didn't know what happened when you stimulated a particular nerve, and the only way to find out is to stimulate that nerve. So there was a genuine scientific inquiry whereby Andrew Ewer would apply a rod to, let's say, the hip and the heel, and that would create a reaction in the leg would kick up and the audience must think, oh wow, what's happening? Is this person coming back to life. And of course, we now know that what is actually happening is the body is conducting electricity from one place to the next, and it's a physical reaction to that. But interestingly, in that particular experiment, Andrew Ure connected a rod from a nerve in the neck that runs down to the diaphragm, and the natural reaction to that is it contracts the diaphragm, the chest rises, and it appears as if this person is taking a breath again. So I can easily see why a lay audience may think, oh, this person's come back to life. If I was reading that story back in the day, I would be terrified at the notion that a body could be brought back to life. But it was a legitimate, it was an active line of scientific inquiry at the time. So yes, I think it would all add to the reaction to this novel coming out, where this mad scientist, if you like, is actually taking that to its full potential and reanimating bodies. So I can imagine it would be a horrific notion for most people reading that.
Cholúas an anna bhí chrúiche chin bio, a Frankenstein a tuig sin suige ysgydysol y hwga go bí.
His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same colour as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shrivelled complexion and straight black lips.
Ha Victor id uanwasachig, agus ha tchiche van een chorp jioli, an grúier id a chdeiter heig sin. Cyrson awr smynach ag ha treig sin a chdeiter?
Wel, ha gachreid yn jirgas joiga sŵl ysgach yn hir trip. Agus ha Victor agra, I saw his dull yellow eye open. I had selected his features as beautiful, beautiful, great God. Ha mis minnig gyfel Victor ganich I gyfynachin, wel chan ie gia hwnnw. Chan nuringo rwyd alin y chrwachich. Chan nuringo yn cwchsyn torsgo hin.
Sylmish gyran. As a farchin gan y sgialog, na dda'n creto oedd chi'n biog as a geri, agos a Frankenstein gydwch oedd gyda sioch gyfel y gran y hegi edd y chretor ffwl sioch a cwdiog stoch gyran tord imerag gynist a ha edd y gran a ha ffadoch yn cwdiog ga hin.
The thing with science and scientific discovery is you're never quite sure what your discovery can then be used for in the future and how it might be applied. So I guess the one that jumps to mind is Oppenheimer, who discovered nuclear fission. And I think it's on record that he was appalled at how his discovery was then used to create such carnage and such horror with an atomic bomb.
Daflion na station ha Victor a fein lichtjed fo achad y gyn sig rac yn jach y frachad og y fwst. Ha chilich go Geneva, agos no dda ha dol iechgyn y nasje farant y rain i gymwst, ha fecyn eich theatr cwlth cryfe. Chan y fain gyfel a nys y ticsyn gyda yn theatr y chrwych esyn yr an y fwst, ach le anna chastus gynnach na cadda y chwyddaeth carriage gan tiolwch Justine Moritz a chai y cronachig agus y crochig son y fwst.
The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold.
Elis y smynachig gyro as a nafr geke William y fwst.
Hanyl mi crydyn gro a giri y fi y farach William Icher. Fa giri kidnap I yan, fa giri gythors yr ffaflaf agos yn ddwrs yn gymbian na charage ga yn ddoi. Agos yn ddwrs yn fa giri fiach yn rhi gachamol safoch, gos na bia gefoch. Ach, as jaiga William y farach, agos e Sean rwyd dysgwtr miche, hanyl y faracin archus sy'n mi. Ha faracin exultant mar a hyn y gra. Ys hwn a chyd trab ha cwch geke. Chafór cwch gyfag Victor hanya cwch rwydgan chrwchych ach cwch rwydgan ysgrys.
As Jega Falafa Geneva, ha Victor a tachart de sich theater a dish ik molloch monton ver an een bjanten na nalp. Han theater a goeie de Frankenstein kunt dat kast ska.
You, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. Everywhere I see bliss from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous.
Ha een greater heen in Kubi, agus as a sport. Ha edrection le Frankenstein. So goed te doen, en ik zie een goed uitgerechen, maar ik me geval drukken, ik geval een parent na het normaal het gespieko as a sport. Gar heekschen, agus een cool drish. Agus could ook nach altine laun, nach altine le goes, ilsait hen stjach, agus een paarschen. Januf na wehe, agus hasing feiken. Siach nach altine eke. Ha jidoch tot ga nur den bunadjoch ha jede hol dinge ging maar girl. No fuse den praktik ook man bier agus boond agus wie kuisige wie kan al terug wie kan geile gaan je kaal gaan schöneke. Agus hasing feiken in the life go in dan nog agus go ji go gesoch. Sa hasing gaken. Ach het lai wel has een kudje gefeken in jarst has zich rechter agus is toch een jarst has een goed ding aking fuse zinish een altrum ashen fuse zinish gold no graag no taik no ade ha kamel dol
Frankenstein a gúntacha gnéiste i scial in ana bhí. Agus de léon sin hátig sin go bhfuil cumas labhart agus cuairach gnéicin. Jeim sich in theater cemar a chamaga hen piol a bhí giche chrán agus jarcan ach sé há míonnach a gach gúil agus campanach. Ach nu a há tín go balipig.
The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me until, grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel.
Son van bhóthach seo de túh taich big an theater camar súil leith bethe agus dé haunt an teolich de lesi. Achad a hadawl agus a bhach agus a níon. Ha míonnach a brúnrú a chalig in teicol leis.
Chafór gyfel cael chonadarach, ri fi siedig fi fasgad noi chorigin a dyniele. Sa tachol dinga ging na druggesing hasing tjinnisteach an hyl le féimlochgan bunadjoch. Agus in gan a féimlochgan sin sé gymi daif cartis agin, gymi cwjoch agin, gymi tjöldoch agin, gas byd de noi as y fel sin y tîn o'n ach gymi a agin. Agus nachal sin lein hyn as yn hyl. Agus sé rwyd a tachart gan a chrétor gyfel ag a harad yn dda cwantysjach ydyn tjöldoch. De lesi agus ha fechgin gyfel iadsen fulug na noi hen le bochgin agus jiffa ripla giragus in na mehe ach sé ha cwjoch y mochwch gyfel daif tjölich agus cardus atryd ha dy cwjoch ag y chéle ha dy smynioch ag cach y chéle agus ha sin ydyn hwmwch y cwngad ysjach ydyn sin. Ach ha ardoch sylw mysio gyfel cwmys ag y cwjoch biach gochug eith na fadoch ging stoche a he kuch ganjöldoch de lesi. Ha ganoch gilsaid an hosoch ha falaf de viagach. Ach an orsin at ha kushin a gloas at the third ha tosoch ganoch gyfel sin janu kronor gyfel sin janu kushin dulich gaif agus leishin ha ganoch gnore gasen levi garch grúd a héna giannu gnúra ga sin lesach agus gnúra ga vi gan hútjoch na go hé. Sa sin sé kumis selum sé kumis gema erd och a hasin. Es ag chrétor.
ha Jen rwtyn bac y gaif. Ha Garich fiegers gagel gaif ha clir gyn sniach van staranac y trongiawri gynnes gaif sy'n cog Jen a sio an doi fieg nath y vierfel gaif sy'n gyfel sio tachyrst. A cwtioch ha geisioch rwy tronfadde agos ha Felix de Lacy y tjekkisk Safi Cymru nyrring ut vi i Leivik hys Cymru nyrring ut vi tyksyn chanen na Franke. Agus a sin cho cwtramach a sin a chrétar cwtioch, byryn ga eisiau nŵrsyn Leivik a hain. Agus ha lorok triliorichan.
The creature only really becomes monstrous based on the books he reads. He reads the Bible, he reads Goethe's Sorrows of Werther, which is a big sentimental novel in the 18th century, and also Milton's Paradise Lost, where he learns about the fall of man and the hypocrisy of humanity and so on.
I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them and their reception of me. I imagined that they would be disgusted until by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words I should first win their favor and afterwards their love.
Ach nu de hachres had geen kusin ietsje de tolt maar van toges. Gaan jullie schaunte je hatau le kenige kodisha brein. Ach ha jonig en kreter de goedjig. Nu de hiles kaag ha isje tol aan de laksje. Agus ha wach gwal jonsi in de kreter naast je sappisch na ui ha tjitje. Nistan amiche na de ha tjillig ha tukshin gewel in tjuldig het tjitje die leenke te gaat ikkel voeisen. Blisig doel ga van dages gemegiat en kajen. Agus ag al lorok heen in der heekshin voedele.
For the first time, the feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them.
Hamis miniger yn parstis trwy an sy'n yw'r nŵr ha y chreithr hen y fiach yn rhi fain a siach yn y tjylwch til leisi. Agus hasin yr fi galentyn, ga ydych eich hen, y fi cho cainal, y fi cho taichal rwa. Agus yn nŵr sy'n hasin yn tlis o dygoch as yn nŵr sy'n brisig tŵl. Ha fi parcheke an y tjylwch, ha fi parcheke an y comanach fac yn dynnu.
Wel, na da hasin ydda joldig, ha trig da goian as y bwyl sy'n orn. Elsaid, ha lefi ydda joldig dy gynnu sy'n mi hasin gair leonig nhw na'r gostwch agos, na da hasin leonti. Na'r bwyg sy'n adroch y fi tiontig ysdiach orn hyn, agos sy'n hyn o'ch amal safal sy'n lefi tarig y falaf. Agos hasin ffech yn creator y genw sy'n goide, na da has ga joldig, na da ha Frankenstein heen ga joldig, na da joldig de Lacy ga joldig. Ach cwtioch sy'n dys tachart. Maar horgedd fi ydda'r joldig, sy'n fel sy'n y bwol gymach. Edd son hasing fiach yn ri ar gian hyn. Agus hasing y fec yn y creator y gian sy'n cwtioch. Ond yn cwtioch oed yn tosioch. Ha tarig y falaf agus gach amal hen safal sy'n fiach yn ri a hen y gianwf faligdi. Ach yn dŵr sy'n ha bwol gymach. Agus hasing mae eginedig sy'n go sgris Elisaid sgris chmwr sy'n goes tachart an y behe Victor Frankenstein.
Hygja van y lor an ag Victor gymwynig eisiau de Geneva. Eintje na hennit jara cacwyd ei ar y falysyn far fel am mwst y frach y ddog agos le cwlwfiast charach y cwyd na cadda ydd Justine carrich gan tjolwch.
Yn rwydys mysygos y ha Victor i ianu. Chan yn creator hen y rheicsian. Sy'n merch o fashion. Ach ar o fa tjöynig yn sy'n yn grasyn. Ach nyr ha cwys lagawn agos ha Justine. Fain yn cyrra ysgon William y fasach eich. Ha coram ag Victor. Dos ywys ra wel ha mysio rwydych na ianu. Ha mysio creator y chrwach eich. Ha mi yn ywys sio y lical mwr sgil ar yn tyl. Ach hynny'n ag ianu. Ha cwrw chlwach y hen. Stoch y clw yn siolach cwtioch biolw ffyrin. Biolw behe Justine.
Gaan je checken aan gaan bruinig toelichtje, ha jachtreich weet er uw was zich. Een hasje geduskig bruin, is een knieuwnig glikrief, duultig. Ha kun je kutjig van je de groeitje.
I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create.
At ferrac is ikkel, ha Victor een hasjig het duultig gaartisch en jeertisch. Ach nu dan kreeg er gradisch, guljenat behenjachentig, uintjennig, is nach dat druk het in je pjo, ha gaartisch. Ha in was het bik de hallig is aan de behe Victor geta, ha dolle fausig jallesit, ach ha jettig aan honnesjen ga heen, gusse van ja bullig keitje zich later.
Ha Frankenstein agus a Harrod Henry Clerval i Januar Lunning. Began fiesen as sin hat a fein fiocha go carriage eile, fesker piast.
In tli go piast hat de stad an Nunegion.
I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet that city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well as Oxford, for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him. But the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle and its environs, the most delightful in the world, Arthur's Seat, St Bernard's Well and the Pentland Hills, compensated him for the change and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration.
At Nunegion lena dorg go tua, trach Huber, is Kilreeving, Suez, Bruchen ta, go piast. Jallig Victor le Henry sin, is ga ma heen go tua, go aatje var een kruutje ga kreeg dar uur. Je me ga willes heen son ik nie wikkelige ware.
Ruinig Frankenstein kun je ga op het eiltje dat ilan bik immelig misk ilan een arku.
It was a place fitted for such work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water, was to be procured from the mainland, which was about 5 miles distant.
Borok a bohan big soerig van toch dat goed ujem is aas. Is er ge krue jaren op het jeesjenich. A ga fijn vurig van eiltj, a kwad fasje saget man koorsit.
In the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monotonous yet ever-changing scene.
Corsiona chaya arcw. Ha mis mynd i'ch gyfer ffeim ac yn siesw yr asbog yn fy nior hen. Han ydych gen am over yn ciol. Tyfys dy nior hen. Ach, awn yn ddoi sio bwnsje Celtic horror. Choffat a hawdol o ddwnin. Ons yn hylen yn sio ha cwys yn y ffas ycaloch. Ha cwys yn y ffas byc yn etheriology as y chiol. Awn yn ddoi ha shit Mary Shelley a gra gynnu. Siol, syring a sio y thachwys as yn dwhig sio hen. He culturis Connery Victor Frankenstein a arcw an the hillen and near as a gan a horn a specution at theology.
Nis ha uintranus is uintranach gemoor a ritron a jaar.
Ha indernus a could your carges agus G cardes ag chess me in the Lord. Fyr horsach an jaar ha waltan yn tlísu is gapola tu ach se in eurut has der bath a wan dynne ha year she carriage. Yn creit yr hyn ha year she carriage na cympanach na tjolach. Ach sio far vela eintje nog ha hullerut ik Victor heen. Ha tjolach aan, ha carriage aan, ach trips de riech ha kur hoere rue. Ach se dolle wie nan einer, an een nater, njollische greter. Kushon.
The hut in which he places himself was just far away enough from quote-unquote civilization to not affect or harm anybody. But also I think the way that Mary Shelley describes the natural habitat there, the wind, the seas and everything, I think it just captures and mirrors Victor's own thinking at the time, that sense of turmoil and danger as much as excitement. I mean, bearing in mind, Frankenstein is a novel in which the main character creates life. It's a wonderful achievement, but he's so beset by the anxiety that arises from playing God. And here he is in the Orkneys, extending that experimentation, but I think finally confronting the true horror of his great achievement.
The Frankenstein is 3 gus a project hort go búl.
During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands.
Ha Victor gafór gisal, dus a chrétar ille a chrúcha suas an anarcaí, ach ha stát, ha acalier. Ha rwys mynig ag bwyl dehat al hachars ans de blianach an ha roin. Han chrétar a Gaelic an cheja America just farnach al dynius am I itjar a fyrroch, agus gan bi a siashan, ach ha acalar Victor gan bi clownach. Agus ans de blianach an ha roin gan chilich na clownshin a rein jorpe, as gan bi lavan noach garore.
A chula lá ha ekel a Victor gynt a lening ddeithar miaid na choninne lenne agus sin a tachart. Ha noch agus an daras a ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me. Eidach liskig ha Victor a cudes gan an a vi uur ma chanju in hauner a ha moinig jewel te sein it.
You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master.
I gealting gym a cwla di Victor yn chyn y bansio hag ddeithar y falal y Sàr-Sgeòil.
A chanil yn oafas y fehwch yn y fforsi gus jeweltus uthyn. Ha marag Henry Clerval, bwlio a ha rhin cdi Victor.
Wel, coha cyntoch as yn ior. Syrn gwydra wel yn creator, agos biar lyms yn creator na nuaf sy'n yfryn haisyn y dynia farach. Ach a fyle eisyn ysgyrroch. Yn e sio lys na hachar gasan a hyf mar a fa Victor galaisich yn e Victor yn nuaf sy'n mô. Yn e Victor yn dynia ha yn orc môr as yn ior sio.
Lac na fwyg snaintyn ha Victor y Chilic o Geneva. Ha la yn ymwysio yn pos a yalsyd, far y fechga di an danca. Ha Victor y cdityn gyda sien y la y hydja fwrst. Ach yr ein chyn y bainsio se yalsyd a'n cdeitar y marag. Las Jason ha ahar y clwyntyn mwy bas agos ha hen y basachig idd o'ch Victor. Ha Victor yn eisiau y chwlwyd dyn i fad lwga y chawl, chan i'r dyn i'r agar ach yn cdeitar y chrwycha.
Who is the true monster of the piece? And I think certainly modern readers, students I speak to, and I love teaching this text so much, as you might imagine, really latch onto the idea of Victor's hypocrisy. He creates this creature, this life, to whom he is a father figure, spurns him. There is that sort of rejection of his own creation, not taking responsibility for his actions, fundamentally.
Ha ffysig Frankenstein na chai a ffosyn o si an y behain o bas a thank ddeithar hast bio. Ha is ag eich ddeithar hyn a ddysyn cwdioch ha macigyd agos ga harwyn gos y lentyn gybolish go cwan ffwr na hartig.
This is a classic tale for nature versus nurture. Is the creature monstrous because of how he's treated or because it's innate into him, it's how he's built, it's baked into him? If so, if it's the latter, then well, the fault lies with Victor because he is the creator, which really takes us down really difficult questions about religion and responsibility and the nature of God and human responsibility as much as compassion.
agus am nghuan na hartig a ha Frankenstein, chain agus kráte, a féin coedd van a Captain Walton, skipedd linge a ha glachtis yn jay, ha gysyn a hechtri at fatga, agus a geori edison yn griaf a galichet, a chud yn ceil, sy'n yn ctheithar a chud gybas, yn ddwrsyn hadal siachad agus yn jog a agal. Nŵd ang ctheithar a fecyn yn corpig Victor, ha goaladachus agus a sirig mahanus.
No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and the majesty of goodness.
Ha ferist grau wel Hiontaich yn creator amach, mae'n hiontaich eisiach na chrw gyl, agos graag, agos gwadoch geng, agos ades o'l calele ege. Ach, edlai fel y chanel ffysaging edrych sy'n. Agos ywyd o'n gyfel, wydjigyn agos behech wydjigyn y gwael sli, chorigyn, na go y higs. Agos mwyswn stocha gymwch cwysyn ydw fi, jefferitje, gan y creator, na mwch tosioch gi. Elle at weke a chadlai velle well quekefis.
Vile insect, abhorred fiend, wretched devil. Chanye pershe a hon sa chreither, she giol a hon, she bias a hon, she beach a hon. Leshen hanil corich an eke, agus hanil de lesthanes sambi, ik Victor.
Chadw gaen am cha, monster a hedd y sylio.
Ha eshin, hanil eshin maragra toshan smia, ma ha anam akad, ha kiol akad, rydynile, ha achakad anon korsnioch, hanil shen icher, ikan chreither hein, hanil yuchereke, ysyn feina shachan yn dil sio.
Na da ha, dyn i symi, gwyn anam, ha sy'n gan ianw coioch, as y fad. As o'n sy'n yn ddoi as y fel sy'n, cymal daif ri chele, as y fer jolus aking, edrych chele, agos ma'n hyr sy'n aid, how gyddoch edd as dynwch no, dehumanized.
Sgialach egelach bronach agos bwyddersach, ysgrif nien og agos I haas na diegre.
Rwgwch Madi Godwin, y fodder, rwgwch I an y siach diag cedd fi hyd sy siach diag an y lwnig. Ni'n dy Mary Wollstonecraft agos Ulam Godwin, agos se cwpl o fwnd y se na fa gymor y sas as y hwle siors rwt a fa tachor se hyf eolus agos teig se ag y nawn se fiaws yn eich fan y Mary Wollstonecraft agos skrifeder agos cwdioch gniach a fa gael uian y ffôlam skrifi A Vindication of the Rights of Women a garagymach gan bachor ffôlam y fieg bod yn eich agos cori yn kerst. Ach, gom I orst ynoch, harw môr an corym ag Madi Godwin eolus y chwydyd y mahad chodwch Chwchol Mary Wollstonecraft, lyr o rwgwch Madi chafwr, nyr fai big yn ysgiach gain. Agos mae'r sy'n chai tocol le hachath le Ulam Godwin, fiaws yn eich eila sgrifet eila niach neoch. Agos se dachi efon as ro dwafas gwn y chyn I cheli efo y sas an y ffôlam, an y eolus, an y ffels yn o'ch gan y sgrifet.
Chod Godwin yn un y gwyddoch y sio an yn Dundee, cwnlodd I tiolwch da charitga William Baxter, y fac y lad ydyr son arach y bwynedrych an yn politics. Har daflu yna, chod I siachad coig mis y gia cwnlodd yw. Gyrsiona hannig I nuans y sio, dech oedd sŵas I?
Wel, a cylchlach fiach yn awn gyrsiona handi sŵas sio. Miach cychlwynist na street se gan handi sŵas yn overslaunch. Gyrwyd yn cysŵas yn nach rhwng planchit lad, agos gyfag I niars tŵas sio. Ach, hams fan sy'n rwydyn dylu y lanting, sga chanyan lamas o chandu choma hwys sio sy'n fyga hies eich jes. Narna biach hasyn yn cwyd yn se gan handi sŵas yn overfölum. Gyfag I ffölum na biar yn alapa na yogi hies sasyn. Ach, ha biach ele ha rwydyn eintio noch, gyniach y cysŵas yn y gnoich. Is on grwy teithbyn y diag y cwnioch fer Shelley, Bard Sasanoch, agos gro hahydd, is on cwyd bycan aster atari agos Shelley, agos nes Heilig is a hasing agus edi can hall fós I Shelley.
Níos fór begad mae un y Jolach Baxter.
Wel, Jolach Baxter had gyma anamal an y iatri gwntje se Jute Barons yn ond as y fale. William Thomas Baxter leis ro cwnlar is ro maddi ffyddoc. Va co o rwc de Davy Baxter agus hw gasin siachat y ffat hedd colw o Baxter Park gan y fale mar Chiolig. Agus na fasich esing gaga gilab fad I môr naim yn peintiga mae yn not. Gilab na smeistar as la hawn yn yw ham casg mich tiad mae yn not yn ysyn.
Cad is wicht dwi'n G colch can ik tosich na nagil y G ag maha?
Chaf ga blaich o môr sa ha yn yw. Ham sŵch yn ydyn naimsyn gyrwn y slygyn a jesio ddichet mil a niach a ffyddoc as fale. Fad rwysi ffyddoc cwrs yn Jolach Baxter fa yd yml o fale. Fa ffyr bygan y mwy balich yn y fale. Va male bek va gymor yn o'r ysy chala agos ydyn naimsyn van y batin yn siol o gymach dwi'n Jason o glosies gan l'Arctic agos yn silag na mwyn mara. So cael ydyn naim gyrnat na opera. Va cydjog charwys ni'n hoffad o falafel blar chalodr. So va dyn as y fale fedd y fi sas yn y blar chalodr. As yn clarit cydjog. Ian dwi'n yn ca, fa ffydog hwys y Cleverhouse. Agus, choffad y, ti'n meddwl, iechyd na 3-4 bilion o ronisyn fa ymplai am dwi'n je. Agus, ffastia ffad ar o Mary Shelley ffydog, ti'n meddwl, 1,000 o falaf, haclog Rudyards. Agus, san os o chlysyn, fi gad y chioldig yn ygyn I fas eich es y fflai. Fi gad cwyddyl yn mwyn, son nach ag yn plai ymach. Agus, fiw, ti'n meddwl, naim cwydjog, Gas fa cron naimsyn chai tac mwst gyda gra agos lwsg y fan y fitsioch magyedig y chai farag an dyn je Grisel Jaffrey I fyny o Berlin agos charo chad a hachas sy'n ach ti'n meddwl 1,000 o falaf o fad o Mary Shelley y ffydog. So ham cets chwlcal a sy'n ti'n siach gab behen a fai hwys y sio cwlwyr sy'n Jolach Baxter.
As yr o'r sgrifi son clofol y gŵr gan lor an y nwciad dieg fi chyd sa hw dieg, o'r maddi, I lived principally in the country as a girl and passed a considerable time in Scotland. I made occasional visits to the more picturesque parts, but my habitual residence was on the blank and dreary northern shores of the Tay, near Dundee. It was beneath the trees of the grounds belonging to our house, or on the bleak sides of the woodless mountains near, that my true compositions, the airy flights of my imagination, were born and fostered.
Sio, Cymon Frankenstein. Ban diedach farfel mission am y hesw, ag awm y faldarach taich môr na Baxter farromaddi y ffyddwch. Agus gyda bedd y cottage ych hannig atish, fan garag lwmolan chryfen. Hw gynwn i'ch wedi siachat y sio, bwy fwr ar y.
Well, two major theories about Frankenstein's steps. One, it's located exactly where the cottage would have been in which Mary Shelley lived whilst in Dundee. The other theory, which is quite popular with locals, is it's really named after the Boris Karloff movie, Frankenstein, 1931, because the Royal Cinema was located there as well. A big source of pride for locals. That it was one of the first places in the world to screen the movie in 1931.
Why was it called the cottage?
So the cottage, unfortunately, no longer stands. It was demolished in the 1890s in the spirit of progress. It's now the site of tenement buildings, for example. It might be classic Dundee humour, the cottage, very much an ironic nickname. And the cottage itself would have been in the grounds of perhaps an acre, perhaps as many as 4 acres. I think she would have been very comfortable there, not just with William Thomas Baxter and his wife, but also the children, who are quite a similar age to Mary, particularly Christina and Isabella, who were very creative in their own way, actually. They were artists and storytellers, and they were a big influence on a young Mary.
Hanel y lawr y min ych cymar fa Victor y ffent na pys yn boic son ych ddeithr yn ych rwchig. A ddysgrifeg, I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay. A chaglu cholwch gromadi y ffein ffisrach ag ffwn y faddi lefyg dy iolus metig eich o dda. Gyharad ffwn ysgrifi yn achgus yn y fa fiach yn cwsiwn y glwys y dyrd, gys adeg ydy janw y machus. Y sio as ychlwg dy hawf ond o je, chaith tŵr y hwgal, far y meg fferfadde y cymal sŵl y machar son gwyni fa fiach yn y cwth bygad ys na hwyn.
Ever since we've been dissecting bodies, there's been an issue of where those bodies come from. And so going back really into the 17th century when the Renaissance happens and human dissection becomes more popular, then there have been records of people stealing bodies to give to the anatomists or to sell to the anatomists.
It sounds astounding and quite grisly, obviously. Yes. And then, of course, it turned into a money-making racket, I suppose. And then, as we know with Burke and Hare, yes, you know, became really dark indeed. When was it rife?
I would say really by the late 1700s, early 1800s, that was probably the kind of climax of it, because that's when there was a massive, massive increase in anatomy teaching and medical teaching of anatomy. The surgeons and the anatomists were then increasingly reluctant to, I guess, get their hands dirty, if you like, and that's where organised gangs step in. The demand is still there for bodies, but they're aware of public perception and they don't want to be seen to be directly involved, so the middlemen come in and where you can make money out of things is throughout human history, then people will make money out of it.
How did they protect the graves of their loved ones from being desecrated?
It depended very much on your financial means, I guess. So if you were poor, then there was very little option available to you. If you had enough money, then you could actually encase your own loved one's grave in what were known as mort safes, which were like metal cages over the wooden coffin, and it might not completely protect the grave, but it would certainly deter a grave robber. In graveyards, what you start to see are watchtowers. These were built and a person would be employed to sit overnight and look out for any suspicious activity and raise the alarm. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, and although it sounds fairly brutal and fairly blunt, there is no way that anyone in this country could have run an anatomy class in those times without using grave robbers. It's simply not possible. The number of students involved and the number of cadavers required meant that grave robbers, because of the circumstances, were needed. In terms of an individual dissection, it's not like these anatomists were looking for the next great discovery. They were purely passing on the anatomical knowledge that they had at the time, which of course is to the benefit of science generally and the benefit of medicine.
We're talking about all of this, of course, in the context of a novel, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The Anatomy Act was passed in 1832 and the novel was published in 1818. But is it quite feasible that she would have known of those scientific advances?
Oh, no, absolutely. This was common knowledge. It was an open secret. Everyone knew that graveyards were being protected. People were terrified that it was going to be their loved ones next that were dug up. And so when you can see visible signs of mort safes and watchtowers springing up in graveyards, this was not, you know, a thing that people didn't know about. And so Mary Shelley would be no different to that.
Charo Callaghan Jave had sa beef o gachin and Baxter, yw dy cyffach madin a bartichin a fydd tor na mwcyn mara, y chile go post, le closichin yn deg, yw dy cwdiach gyffach ffagin can y marichin, ag sa fwa yw sialak na mwchgore.
So the cottage itself overlooked the harbour, so Mary Shelley would have seen those ships taking their journeys. But interestingly, not long before she came to Dundee, a local whaling ship called the Orkney was lost at sea in 1810. So she would have perhaps heard stories about that disaster from family members or people involved. It became quite a big local story in many ways. And there's certainly a sense that the sailors and the seamen and the shipmen and people involved in that industry would have been known to Mary through family connections. The Baxter family did have their hand in all kinds of industries, definitely, yeah. So overlooking the harbour, the sounds, the smells, everything would have been there.
We got the fall of a show Steinrich, and we got the fine teaching the BR here in the Arctic. Now, here got what Falach, wat Saloch, wat Chinishach na Halle, le Batin, wat Land Falach, le Mukenmare, Klossichen Mukenmare aboard, Klossichen Roin. Wat voor de jedermachers de Mukenmare ga leuk, hier is de Halle, is wat de klakken en alle was in Noorden aan de Oberduut, wat in de Snaland. Zo, we mogen weten het Falachs, we mogen weten firms, geluidig, wat je misschien leuk ook al was. Zo, aan mijn tijdje kon ik de bjakken was in de jaren, schach aan een jaar, is waar de gemaakt schach aan een jaar.
Had dyn gan y fiach gynna'ch maddi chwrst gan Rhynyorp y College yn Teolwch Baxter, agos gynt y hyladedd bale Darmstadt ys i geramalt. Ag oedd y fale sy'n ha yn castiol bwrg Frankenstein. Nes na ddau am Dundee hwyd i corym yn cwngad i teolwch, colwch i teolwch hyn. Stoch na biarche, na befiastiche, hwyd i cyw yn chwrst gan Rhynyorp y cwngad rŵ.
Hwyd agos ac yn nawn fag yma ffasant y gol gan Rhynyorp agos chaiad wrth y rhain, mae'r hiwlwch y Baxters agos Mary, agos chaiad ffas gyda tyr fel castiol Frankenstein, a chasio un dyn nhw had cwtio tocal ceist ne y chwrst yn y chwyd y stodi na cawn, ha stod iawn grw fer yr rw dipol, ha mis mynd yn dipol. Fa fyr o'ch ffasgydd y nature, fa gyr i Castro Frankenstein ga hyn, agos fa iawle grw adol y ian o ole fyddych behe hir i dy fach gydynia.
Ag sia blaen gia cwgmaddi gwyl gan y fard Mary Shelley, fa gwyl yn gys ga chael y chechdiach ys doen, le imig tyfydd, agos fa Percy John o'ch gylenig i siod ysgrifig.
Heichi hyn le Percy Byssy Shelley, y barst romansach, se oersla van y Shelley gyda farw gol ymach y diwlwch ag sga politics radicach ysrwyd yn eile ednach rwad y gyntach. Ach fa post ag tier rw Harriet, agos mar sy'n harw ceteg i ffala le Mary. Ach heichad colach agos gyfri sy'n sgar y gwasach an y behe diwlich. Fa i'r llenw y chawl agos cael ei clawn y farach, cwdioch y bod nhw'ch boch, fa i'r mad y chawl. Ach fa Mary agos Percy mar sy'n harw falche rompa an y tord ag ach i'n Baxters an y nalap a mydd eisiau bled sgwr eisiau Baxter y fanna dew carid dy faddi sgwr at y frin i chael y bwlwch chwyd y dyniau eisiau litr hwnsach gymadi. Mar sy'n fa i hen agos Percy car fala feter yr Rhynyorp agos brechtyn agos cwsiach y torwng y lwyb gyn y car mar y fad hyn, siwrt y set car resi Byron agos dyn y eile fa sas an y sgrifig agos an y... Agos e carw beha, am y crytio carw berst y sgilior ys o'n beha car arit y fiachga. Fa fwy yn fi gyfa sio mwyn gyr nefn mar y fachgo o'r Byron, Shelley, Mary Shelley, agos y lesfiwr Caroline y fath halele Byron, agos dochter y baniagaeth, cwdioch sa sy'n un dynach yn ysmynnu hysdywydd iddi sio'r science ma sir han Frankenstein. Fa villa mor briaig Byron a charw fa Maria's Percy an y nat na blwga ffasge laif. Hwg Byron at colach agos hwg a siwrt dwlan gaif. Fa dyr ffad fa uiach an y sgielwch yn y chwyd gydys o'ch agost agos stodion ma haif sy'n as y ffart sy'n yn y dŵl agos mar sy'n y dŵlan sgrig at wla stodi mar sy'n agos hir at cob y fwa o chwych ffiegal et cach agos gael af eisiau hwnig i had yr ag y ffach i aslink agos hannig y stodi mar sy'n hichge hafwr yn y naslink fa i feiking Frankenstein agos y greit ar gyda chlwysach gyrgris yn hyn yn y fawr y hast agos hos i sgrifach agos sgrifi stodi sy'n nŵr sy'n sgrifi nofel.
As jeng an y fawr Byron ffart bysiefolwg as ysgrifig at sgialach yn mhwhaisyn, chwyd maddi rep sgialach ysgrifig that would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror.
Gynchacw sé seo leor Gothic horror, am sy'n marhaen leif gyda chi dolmach. Ach cwtioch dir mar bohac y chreiter hein ar y ian repris na crymacan yr cwrachele o gnean y theology. Sio, cwtioch y lor sci-fi, y hyd lor sci-fi yn byrlas yn ygdra, cwtioch se buildings romana hawn, ac eisiau sgiolach behe Victor ac sgiolach behe chreiter.
Gwlach ysgialach gig Mary Shelley mac menemyn tlwy tron y leintyn ffo sgrifia, hang ddeith yr min adarach y chrwy chi na chohore, ydd sgialach gyn uafasach uafara.
Y hylig i nief ei chrwych Boris Karloff, hannig strwyd de filmichin, programen television, oren agos liorichin gelatje. Ha Chris Maddoch na professor Sàr-Sgeòil liorichin gelatje ag oleich yn J.
Chris, when did Frankenstein first appear in comic form?
Well, there's been many different versions of Frankenstein in comics. Probably the first version to appear in comics is in the late 1930s, which was a comic called Movie Comics, issue 1, which was published by National Periodicals, which was now the company is called DC Comics. Classics Illustrated was this title that was set up by a company called Gilberton. Their idea was that they were going to create comics that adapted literature and partly for an educational purpose. And the Frankenstein comic that they did in 1945 was one of their most successful. It stayed in print for many decades, 19 different editions. If you look at them, they're all very different. So that the version that you see in the Classics Illustrated story at the same time, Dick Breather, who's a cartoonist, a comics creator, also did a version of the creature which started off as being, it was in the contemporary, it was in modern day setting, and he was basically a heavy for a gangster. And then Dick Breather then moved on to do a very comedic version of Frankenstein. As horror comics started to be banned, there was a version that Dick Breather did that was very funny, and then there was a superhero version later in the 60s and so on. And that really kind of points to the fact that the character and also the novel, this is the genius of Shelley's story and also of the characterization in that story, is that they're very responsive to different contexts. So for the Being Human Festival, we created this, Mary Shelley's Dundee, or Frankenstein Begins.
Which looks amazing, as you would imagine. But so, how would you describe the content, for example?
Yeah, there was a story that we wanted to tell, which was of Mary Shelley's time in Dundee, what she might have seen and experienced and thought, based on the little evidence that there is from the preface that she wrote, but really kind of expanded that, and we really want to draw attention to that story and to make people more aware of that really important historical connection with the city in this, world famous and hugely important novel. Norrie Miller, who was the artist who we worked with on the first comic, was a big fan of Bernie Wrightson, so we very much wanted to bring that into the story, so that influenced his visualization of the creature. The initial version was in black and white, and it was later recolored by Rebecca Horner, and she did a wonderful job with a lovely muted palette of bringing that story together. So we have Mary in Dundee, out there in Broughty Ferry with Broughty Ferry Castle, but haunted by visions of the creature. She travels through Dundee, meets a rather brutish worker at the docks who has some passing resemblance to the creature. She travels through the town, and in her nightmares, though, she has visions of death and destruction and turmoil and apocalypse, and these are kind of mapped on to some of the events in Mary's life.
Ha imig sgial húsach fílte is Lord Frankenstein. Ach stácha greb di se kvíis tjevi. Gewil anavi nach ro sirig ach gúl agus campanis idir ruakig agus ruatach van tlúg. Gaogart is gachol sa fain.
There's often this thing about people mistake Victor for the creature and the creature for Victor, and they refer to the creature as Frankenstein, which in so many of the comics adaptations he is. You know, so that's become common parlance. It's in a way it's not wrong to call the creature Frankenstein, because of course one of the explicit themes of the novel is that he is the progeny, he is a child of Victor, and at several points in the novel he's referred to as Adam, the first of his kind, you know, as in Adam and Eve. So, you know, in a kind of very literal reading of it, you know, he's Adam Frankenstein.
Is je fer hanne Victor ver a hogal le ma the vakama gulch le a the vakama gulch a han je lesen net min jingi jith if na jemis to torch the grete ruur is on a chumal beo falling agus doel agus am sminging gever torein gever nater the rawe gaun sminging gere lore han a ha togal christian sheche vi gam fragert and you kushi is Frankenstein sminging oh well va wesen va kersh ni hier no house sminging what Jane roet aan misje nam weg. Aha, ha mij saulachig, dus je verg gwoord Victor.
A mis me gungo gavoor a jare a levig azur as a lein as a welshing bio agus gaharaj far a welshing bio in draast far a welshing inische hanide va komende sing vi biakoch edar collas heen agus collas genielle agus shidig stoge elisait Píseach hordeth gaspí déing smúneach a féimeach píseach gaspí chuir sin choch an húlting agin. Agus a bhí smúneach an an dáid chorigin go bhfuil Mary Shelley a trúchad chavór rí fata fall fón a bhaise beá a chuúd goide isteach an sgealach. Na beach na hagan mu dhéon chuiris a bechóir gan bhí colch ná collas agus chuideach nó cúnardin. Stoche gaan kutch a ha leib a vi shidig sin agus a shidig urigig genausig.
It's just incredible to think of the impact this novel has had. It's hard to think of a more impactful novel, I think, actually, than Frankenstein. It can be read as a moral parable, a warning, a cautionary tale, if you like, playing God, and that's become a staple, of course, of movies and books and drama ever since.
Horror an go changeoch ach ha kujoch etar isteach biaken macaninne de chéle agus timmer sin jailtir de chéle agus timmer sin kwaad tussen hul as een nationach biaken science biaken het behe heen.
Ha novel toirs rafig gein, mi de ha tachas nir ha fiach nir kus jolas, nir kus smach gein nater, sin mar han sci-fi gop around. Ach kutjoch ha toirs rafig de ha steegtje sa ha, in common, in course nioch gakinne. Agus mir a hilsin tol jolas, mir a hilsin toirst gu na kormen, no fius gul gan a hulle dinne, heidrut kjar.
Surun gynne doove se jennu le science, ach a version a tiksing na gunnersten, a version a tiksing a dleistenes a horn, jennu kienjach na harsing a jennu skrist bi dunje ele een doel. Ha koachgen agus kommen nach in nach ro en nach des munig Mary Shelley rief. Ach geforst nog hanuching kretere oer die hele agus nur hortse dat speel haast.
Gléor Frankenstein innive an y lítrachas na beole ach dda alab yn dwych agus y hechtri cwtrymach an y fi cwd crw y sgialach gegelwch ag Mary Shelley.